children heading to school, people moving through narrow streets, until one ordinary day when something extraordinary and horrifying arrived at a police station. A letter. The letter was unlike the routine reports officers were used to. It was written with calm certainty. Its voice was brazen. It announced a tally, a completion. My count ends at 100, it said. My mission is complete. It promised that the writer's message would reach the world. It threatened, in language that made the skin crawl, to send children to their end without shrouds, as if listing his acts were some grim trophy. Attached were names, 11 of them at first, with addresses and terrible claims about how each child had been taken. The author of the letter wrote, with detail and with distance. He included notations about locations and methods. He gave an address, 16B, Ravi Road. Officers took the letter seriously. They went to the address, a modest house opened to them, and a man came to the door. He was 38 years old. His name, Javed Iqbal. He answered questions, and at one point, placed a gun at his own head, a gesture that stunned the officers enough that they left without searching the house. Some assumed they had met a disturbed man who could be safely set aside. No one yet imagined the scale of what lay beneath that ordinary facade. Days later, the story would widen. A parcel turned up at a newspaper office. Inside were photographs, photos of children. There was a hand-scrawled note, and there was a diary, a ledger of claims, a catalog of crimes the sender asserted he had committed. The contents were deliberate and provocative, designed to be found and to force a public reaction. When investigators finally returned to the house at Ravi Road, what they found pushed the case from shocking to a national emergency. The rooms contained personal effects, shoes, clothing, items that suggested a deeply disturbing collection. There were containers that showed signs of chemical use, and there were cards and notes placed like taunts, detailing names and fragments of information. Whatever the motive behind the presentation, the evidence presented enough of a pattern that the police could not dismiss the claims as hoax or fantasy. The name and the man at the center of this storm refused to be ignored. Javed spoke to journalists. He walked into newspaper offices and made statements that read like confessions. He described a life of grievance and humiliation. He told stories of a childhood and of a series of experiences he said had hardened him. Whether these stories were meant to explain, to justify, or simply to shock, they did one undeniable thing. They placed him squarely in the glare of public attention. As the investigation expanded, families that had been living with missing children were left to relive every nightmare. Reports came in from different parts of the city. Children who had left home for small errands and never returned. Young boys who worked in arcades, at stalls, or in the city's busiest public spaces. Street children who were vulnerable because they had no adults watching over them. A pattern emerged. Many of the children taken were those who had been overlooked by society. Those whose absence could too easily be written off as another child who ran away, another boy who slept on a neighbor's doorstep. Information trickled, then surged. Names were compiled. In time, authorities identified dozens of victims, accounts from families, witnesses, and investigators painted a bleak picture of how a predator had operated in plain sight. By offering food, a momentary refuge, or small amounts of money, by finding lives on the margins and exploiting them, the criminal story that unfolded was not merely one of a single individual's depravity, but of systemic gaps that allowed those vulnerabilities to be exploited. The press covered the case with intensity. Headlines multiplied, editorials demanded answers, and the public demanded consequences. The man who had come to the newspaper and sat calmly across from reporters, who had described his acts with a mixture of detachment and outrage at his own past, became the focus of a nation's wrath. People in Lahore and across Pakistan wanted justice. They wanted to understand how such violence could have happened under their very roofs. In court, the story continued to unspool. Evidence was presented. Witness after witness stepped forward, and a portrait of culpability was assembled. The accused offered different explanations at different times. At one point, he claimed to have committed the acts as a way to draw attention to the plight of street children, a twisted logic that strained credulity and failed to account for the cruelty described in the allegations. At other times, he recanted and offered alternative narratives. The shifting testimony only added to the complexity of the trial, but it did not stop the wheels of justice from turning. The trial was a national moment. Crowds gathered outside courthouses. Families watched, some seeking closure, others fearing that no verdict could undo what had been done. Commentators argued about punishment and about the ethics of retribution. Human rights organizations raised questions about the death penalty and about the treatment of incarcerated individuals. The case thus became not only a criminal trial, but a catalyst for broader societal debate. As legal proceedings moved forward, additional names surfaced. Alleged accomplices, men who had either aided or abetted in various ways. Some were charged and convicted. The courts considered not only the primary accusations, but also the web of circumstances that had allowed this pattern to persist. Sentences were handed down. Punishments were meted out. For many, the outcome felt like a measure of justice. For others, no sentence could restore what had been lost. Before all matters could be fully resolved, however, the accused was found dead. While in custody, officials declared that he had taken his own life. For some, this ending offered a bleak form of closure. For others, it opened new questions. Was this suicide an escape from punishment? Or did it silence a man whose testimony might have revealed still more names and truths? Conspiracy theories and alternate explanations proliferated. Some wondered whether the death extinguished the full truth or prevented new revelations. In the years that followed, the echoes of the case reverberated through Lahore. Families mourned. Communities reflected on how children could be left so exposed. The public grappled with uncomfortable questions. How many warnings were ignored? How many children lived on the margins without protection? What responsibility did institutions carry for prevention? School systems, social services, and policing practices came under scrutiny. The case forced a national assessment of how to safeguard the most vulnerable. But beyond the institutions and the debates, there is the quieter, longer story. The story of the families. Parents returned to empty rooms and to the rituals of grief. Mothers and fathers lit candles. Some found ways to seek justice through the legal system. Others searched for answers that would not come. The community itself became a kind of witness. Empty playgrounds and unattended sandals on porches became small memorials to loss. This case, horrific as it is not only about the actions of one man. It is also a mirror held up to society. It asks difficult questions about poverty and neglect, about how communities treat their children, about the systems that fail to protect those who most need protection. It asks whether vigilance can be taught, whether compassion can be institutionalized, and whether the gaps that allowed such crimes to occur can be closed. There are other questions that linger. How do we, as a society, recognize the warning signs before tragedy strikes? How do we support the families left behind? How do we protect children who have no strong safety net? The answers are neither easy nor immediate. They require policy change, community involvement, and sustained attention to the vulnerabilities that predators exploit. For historians and journalists, this case remains a reference point, a painful chapter that shaped conversations on child protection in Pakistan and beyond. For activists, it became a rallying cry to improve social services, to strengthen investigations, and to prioritize the safety of street children. For ordinary citizens, it was a reminder that the world is not always as secure as we imagine, and that shadows can hide in places where we least expect them. Tonight, when you walk past a playground or pass a school, you might think of those children. You might wonder how many small absences go unnoticed each day, how many families carry a silence too heavy to speak, and you might consider what you would do as a neighbor, as a parent, as a citizen, to make sure that no child slips through the cracks. This story is long and painful, and it resists tidy endings. Some names were recorded. Some families received the barest measure of closure. The rest remains a scar on a city that continues to remember. The case prompted change in some quarters, debate in others, and above all, a reassessment of how societies care for their most vulnerable. We tell this story not to sensationalize suffering, but to remember those who cannot speak for themselves, and to remind ourselves of the responsibility we all share in protecting children. We tell it so that the lessons it carries are not forgotten, and so that history can inform change. If you seek to learn more, look to reputable archives and court records. Read with compassion for the victims, and with a critical